Look closely at this woman. In exactly 30 seconds, she's going to make a mistake. A tiny typing error on a cracked phone screen. One wrong digit. But that mistake will bring back the man she's been hiding from for 6 years. The father of her children. The love she was forced to abandon. And when he finds her here, freezing in the snow with 2 children he never knew existed, everything will change. Subscribe right now, because this story will take you from this frozen bench to a courtroom battle, from buried secrets to public redemption, from broken hearts to healing. This is a story you need to see until the end. Hit subscribe. Enable notifications. Because the wrong number is about to become the right miracle. She typed the wrong number on the coldest night of her life, and the man who answered was the one person she'd been hiding from for 6 years. What he discovered that night would unravel a web of lies, betrayal, and a secret that could destroy them both. Winter doesn't ask permission in Harborview. It arrives like a debt collector, cold, merciless, and impossible to ignore. And on this particular January night, the city felt like it had forgotten what warmth even meant. Marlowe Avenue was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when people have rushed indoors, when shop owners have locked their doors early, when even the streetlights seem to flicker a little less brightly against the falling snow. The wind cut through the empty street like a knife, and anyone with sense was already home, wrapped in blankets, safe behind locked doors. But not everyone had a door to lock. On a bench near the corner, beneath a streetlight that barely worked, sat Lena Morris. She wasn't old, 32, if you asked, but tonight, she felt ancient. Her coat was thin, bought from a thrift store 3 winters ago, and it had never been enough. Her hands were wrapped around 2 small bodies, her twin children, Maya and Ethan, both 5 years old. They pressed against her sides, trying to steal whatever warmth her body could offer. "Mommy, I'm cold," Maya whispered, her voice so small it almost disappeared into the wind. "I know, baby. I know." Lena pulled her daughter closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Just a little longer, okay? Just a little longer." But Lena didn't know how much longer. She didn't know anything anymore except that she had run out of options. 3 months ago, she'd lost her job. 2 months ago, she'd lost the apartment. 4 weeks ago, she'd lost the last of her savings trying to keep her children fed. And tonight she'd lost her pride. Her phone, an old cracked thing she'd been nursing along for years, sat heavy in her pocket. She'd avoided this moment for as long as she could. Asking for help. Admitting she couldn't do this alone. But when you're sitting on a frozen bench watching your children shiver, pride becomes a luxury you can't afford. With trembling fingers, from cold or fear, she couldn't tell, Lena pulled out her phone. There was a woman from the shelter she'd met once, months ago. Sarah. Sarah had told her to call if she ever needed anything. Lena had saved the number, hoping she'd never have to use it. The screen was so cracked she could barely see the numbers. Her fingers were so cold they wouldn't cooperate. She typed slowly, carefully, squinting at each digit. "Please. Need shelter for the night. Me and my 2 kids. Anywhere. I'm begging you." She hit send before she could think about it too much. Before shame could stop her. Ethan coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Lena's chest tighten with fear. He'd been fighting a cold for days, and it was getting worse. She pulled him closer, tucking his head under her chin. "It's okay, sweetheart. Someone's going to help us. I promise." She closed her eyes and prayed to whoever might be listening that she hadn't just lied to her son. 12 miles away, in a high-rise that touched the clouds, Julian Hart stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse and looked out at the city below. From up here, Harborview looked beautiful. The snow turned everything soft and clean. The lights twinkled like stars. You couldn't see the cold. You couldn't see the people huddled in doorways or the families with nowhere to go. From up here, everything looked perfect. Julian's reflection stared back at him from the glass, expensive suit, sharp jawline, dark hair styled just so. Successful. Powerful. 40 years old and at the top of his game. CEO of Hart Industries, a company worth billions. A man who had everything. Except he didn't, did he? The penthouse was immaculate. Designer furniture, original artwork, a kitchen that had never been properly used. Everything in its place. Everything perfect and cold and empty. Julian had built this life brick by brick. He'd worked 18-hour days, closed impossible deals, made ruthless decisions. He'd sacrificed everything for success. Including, once upon a time, the only thing that had ever really mattered. His phone buzzed on the marble counter. He almost ignored it, he was exhausted, and it was late, but something made him look. An unknown number. A text message. "Please. Need shelter for the night. Me and my 2 kids. Anywhere. I'm begging you." Julian's first thought was spam. A scam. He should delete it. But then his eyes caught on the sender's name that appeared when he clicked the message details. Lena Morris. The phone slipped in his hand. His heart stopped, then kicked into overdrive, pounding so hard he could hear it. Lena. 6 years. 6 years since she'd walked out of his life without explanation. No note. No phone call. No goodbye. One day she was there, laughing in his kitchen, falling asleep in his arms, talking about their future, and the next day, she was gone. Vanished. Like she'd never existed at all. He'd searched for her. God, how he'd searched. Private investigators, police reports, every resource he had. Nothing. She'd disappeared so completely it was like she'd become a ghost. And eventually, he'd forced himself to stop looking. To stop hoping. To accept that she'd made her choice, and that choice wasn't him. But now. Me and my 2 kids. Kids. Lena had children. Julian's mind raced. 6 years ago. The timeline. No. He couldn't let himself think that. Not yet. Not until he knew. His hands were shaking as he typed back. Where are you? The response came almost immediately. Marlowe Avenue. The bench near Morrison Street. I'm sorry. Wrong number. Forget it. Wrong number. She didn't know she'd texted him. She probably didn't even have his number anymore. She wasn't reaching out to him, it was an accident, a mistake, a mistyped digit in her desperation. But Julian didn't care about any of that. He grabbed his coat and ran for the door. The drive to Marlowe Avenue should have taken 20 minutes. Julian made it in 12, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. His mind wouldn't stop spinning. What if it really was her? What if she was in trouble? What if those kids? He forced the thought away. One step at a time. The snow was falling harder now, turning the road slick. His car, a sleek black Mercedes that cost more than most people's houses, felt ridiculous as he navigated through the increasingly empty streets. When he finally turned onto Marlowe Avenue, his headlights swept across the nearly deserted street. And there, beneath a dying streetlight, he saw them. A woman on a bench. 2 small figures huddled against her. Julian's breath caught. He pulled over, not caring that he was blocking the street, and climbed out of the car. The cold hit him immediately, he hadn't even felt it in his rush, but he barely noticed. He was walking toward the bench, his heart in his throat, and then. She looked up. Lena. Older. Thinner. Exhausted. But unmistakably her. Those same green eyes that used to look at him like he was the only person in the world. Except now those eyes were wide with shock, then fear, then something that looked like despair. Julian. His name came out as barely a whisper. Lena. He stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure. 6 years of questions flooding his mind all at once. 6 years of anger and hurt and confusion. But all of that disappeared when he looked at the 2 children pressed against her sides. Twins. A boy and a girl, maybe 5 years old. Dark hair. Watching him with cautious, frightened eyes. His eyes. Oh God. Those were his eyes. Please, Lena said, her voice breaking. Please just go. Forget you saw us. This was a mistake. A mistake? Julian's voice came out hoarse. Lena, you're freezing. The kids are. He looked at the boy, saw him shivering violently, heard the rattle in his breath. He's sick. We'll be fine. The shelter will. Stop. Julian crouched down so he was at eye level with them. His mind was screaming with questions, but right now, none of that mattered. I don't know what happened. I don't know why you left or where you've been or, his eyes flickered to the children again. Or anything. But right now, you need help. Please. Let me help you. Lena's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. You can't. Then explain it to me. But not here. Not in the freezing cold with your children getting sick. He stood up, gesturing to his car. One night. Just let me give you a warm place to sleep, something to eat, and we can figure out the rest tomorrow. Please, Lena. She looked at him for a long moment. He could see the war happening behind her eyes, pride fighting desperation, fear fighting need. Finally, she looked down at her children, at Ethan's pale face and Maya's shaking shoulders, and something in her broke. Okay, she whispered. Just for tonight. Julian helped them up, and they felt so light, so fragile, like they might blow away in the wind. The children moved slowly, stiffly, their small bodies nearly numb from the cold. He opened the car door and helped them inside, cranking the heat up as high as it would go. As he drove back toward his penthouse, the snow falling steadily around them, Julian glanced in the rearview mirror. Lena sat in the back between the 2 children, her arms wrapped around them, her face pressed against Maya's hair. The little girl had already fallen asleep. The boy, Ethan, she'd called him, was fighting it, his eyes drooping but suspicious, like he was afraid to let his guard down. And Julian felt something crack open inside his chest. Something that had been frozen for 6 years. Because he knew, even without confirmation, even without proof, he knew those children were his. He could feel it in his bones, see it in their faces, recognize it in the way they held themselves. Lena had disappeared 6 years ago without a word. And she'd been carrying his children. The questions could wait. The anger and hurt and betrayal could wait. Right now, all that mattered was getting them warm, getting them safe, getting them inside. But as he pulled into the parking garage of his building, as he helped them out of the car and toward the elevator, Julian made himself a silent promise. He was going to find out the truth. All of it. And this time, he wasn't going to let them disappear again. The penthouse felt different with people in it. Julian had lived here for 4 years, and it had always felt more like a museum than a home. Beautiful but untouchable. Perfect but lifeless. But now, with Lena and the children standing in his living room, dripping melted snow onto his expensive floors, it suddenly felt human. The bathroom is down that hall, Julian said, pointing. There are towels, and I'll find some clothes. They'll be too big, but they'll be warm and dry. Take as long as you need. Lena nodded but didn't move. She was still holding the children close, like she was afraid to let go. Like if she did, this might all disappear. Lena, Julian said softly. It's okay. You're safe here. She looked up at him, and the vulnerability in her eyes nearly broke him. For tonight, she said quietly. Just for tonight. Just for tonight, he agreed, even though he knew it was a lie. Even though he knew that nothing about this was going to be simple or temporary or just one night. Because the moment Lena had disappeared 6 years ago, she'd taken his heart with her. And now she was back, with 2 children who had his eyes and her smile, and Julian knew with absolute certainty that he wasn't going to let them go. Not again. Not ever. But first, they needed warmth. Food. Safety. The rest could come later. As Lena led the children toward the bathroom, Julian stood alone in his living room and let out a long, shaky breath. His hands were trembling. His heart was racing. And for the first time in 6 years, he felt something other than the cold emptiness that had become his constant companion. He felt hope. And he felt fear. Because whatever had driven Lena away 6 years ago, whatever had made her choose to raise their children alone, to disappear so completely that even his resources couldn't find her, it had to be something terrible. Something big enough to make her walk away from the life they'd been building together. And now, whether she wanted to or not, she was going to have to tell him the truth. But tonight, she'd given him something more precious than answers. She'd given him a chance. A chance to make things right. A chance to be there for the children he never knew existed. A chance to understand what went wrong and maybe, just maybe, to fix it. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. And in a penthouse high above the frozen streets, a family that didn't quite know it was a family yet began the slow, painful, beautiful process of coming together. It started with the wrong number on the coldest night of the year. But it wouldn't end there. Not by a long shot. What began as a desperate mistake on a frozen bench has brought Julian face to face with the woman who shattered his world, and 2 children who might be his entire future. But Lena's fear runs deeper than the winter cold, and the secrets she's been keeping could destroy them all. In Chapter 2, the truth will finally come to light, and nothing will ever be the same again. The warmth of shelter brought them together. But truth, painful, buried, unforgiving truth, would decide if they could stay that way. The first morning came quietly. Julian woke on his own couch, his neck stiff, his expensive suit wrinkled beyond recognition. He'd given Lena and the children his bedroom, the only proper bed in the penthouse, and spent the night drifting in and out of restless sleep, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people breathing in his home. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the snow-covered city into something almost magical. For a moment, Julian wondered if he'd dreamed the whole thing. If he'd imagined Lena and the children showing up out of nowhere, a ghost made flesh by loneliness and too many sleepless nights. Then he heard it. A small cough from down the hall. The quiet murmur of Lena's voice, soothing and gentle. Real. They were real. Julian sat up, running his hands through his hair. His mind was clearer now than it had been last night, when shock and instinct had taken over. Now the questions came flooding back, relentless and demanding. Where had she been? Why had she left? Were those children really his? And if they were, why had she kept them from him? But he forced himself to slow down. To breathe. Demanding answers from someone who'd spent the night on a frozen bench wasn't just cruel, it was stupid. Whatever Lena's reasons for leaving, whatever secrets she'd been keeping, they'd waited 6 years. They could wait a few more hours. First things first. Breakfast. Julian moved through his kitchen, a space so pristine it looked like it had never been used, because it mostly hadn't, and started pulling out ingredients. Eggs. Bread. Orange juice. His housekeeper kept the place stocked, even though he usually just grabbed coffee and left. He wasn't much of a cook, but he could manage scrambled eggs and toast. It was something. It was a start. He was halfway through cracking eggs when he heard the soft pad of footsteps behind him. "Mommy says we have to be quiet because this isn't our house." Julian turned to find the little girl, Maya, standing in the doorway. She was wearing one of his t-shirts, which hung down to her ankles like a dress. Her dark hair was tangled, and she was watching him with those enormous eyes that looked so much like his own it made his chest ache. "Your mommy's right that this isn't your house," Julian said carefully, crouching down to her level. "But you don't have to be quiet. This is a home, and homes are meant to have noise in them." Maya tilted her head, considering this. "Our old home had noise. Before we had to leave." Something in Julian's chest cracked a little more. "Well, while you're here, you can make all the noise you want. Deal?" A tiny smile flickered across her face. "Deal. Are you hungry?" She nodded, and Julian gestured to the kitchen island. "How about you sit right here and help me cook? I'm making scrambled eggs, but I'm not very good at it. Think you can supervise?" Maya climbed onto one of the tall stools, her feet dangling, and watched as Julian whisked the eggs. She didn't say much, but she didn't leave either, and Julian counted that as a victory. A few minutes later, Ethan appeared, followed by Lena. The boy looked better than he had last night, less pale, though he was still coughing, and he immediately moved to his mother's side, holding onto her hand like a lifeline. Protective. Even at 5 years old, he'd learned to be the guardian. Lena looked exhausted. She'd slept in her clothes, and her eyes had the hollow, haunted look of someone who hadn't slept well in years, not just one night. But she'd washed her face, and in the morning light, Julian could see her more clearly. Still beautiful. Still the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But harder now. Worn down by something he didn't yet understand. "I made breakfast," Julian said, keeping his voice neutral. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot." "You didn't have to," Lena started, but Julian shook his head. "I wanted to." They ate at the kitchen island, an awkward, fragile thing. The children were hungry, desperately so, and Julian had to stop himself from commenting on how quickly they devoured their food. Lena ate slowly, mechanically, like she'd forgotten how to enjoy eating and was just going through the motions of survival. "Ethan needs medicine," Lena said quietly, not looking at Julian. "For his cough. I can go to the pharmacy if you'll just." "I'll go," Julian interrupted. "Or better yet, I'll call my doctor. He makes house calls." Julian, "No. That's too much. We're already." "Lena." He waited until she looked at him. "Let me help. Please." She held his gaze for a long moment, and Julian could see the war happening behind her eyes again. Pride versus need. Fear versus desperation. Finally, she nodded, just once, and looked away. Julian made the call. His doctor, a man who charged more per hour than most people made in a month, agreed to come by that afternoon. Money had its privileges, and for once, Julian was grateful for every single one of them. "Just for today," Lena said quietly after the children had finished eating and wandered toward the living room windows to look at the snow. "Until Ethan's better. Then we'll go." "Go where?" The question came out harder than Julian intended. Lena flinched. "The shelter. They'll have space." "No. Julian. No." He stood up, shoving his hands in his pockets to keep them from shaking. "You're not taking those kids to a shelter. Not when I have more space than I know what to do with. Not when," he stopped himself, the question burning on his tongue. Lena stood too, her jaw tight. "Not when what? Are they mine?" The words came out raw, desperate. "Lena, please. Just tell me. Are they mine?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. In the living room, Maya laughed at something Ethan had said, the sound bright and innocent and completely unaware of the earthquake happening 10 feet away. Lena's eyes filled with tears, and that was answer enough. "Yes," she whispered. "They're yours." Julian's knees almost gave out. He grabbed the edge of the counter, the world tilting sideways. 6 years. 6 years he'd had children and didn't know it. 6 years of birthdays and first words and first steps, all of it stolen from him. "Why?" His voice broke on the word. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you just disappear? I looked for you, Lena. I looked everywhere. I thought," he couldn't finish. Couldn't say out loud all the terrible things he'd imagined might have happened to her. "I had to." Lena's voice was barely audible. "Julian, I had to. If I'd stayed." "If you'd stayed, what? We could have been a family? I could have been there for you, for them? What possible reason could you have had for? Your uncle threatened to destroy us both." The words hit Julian like a physical blow. He stared at Lena, certain he'd misheard. "What?" Lena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking small and broken and scared. "Your uncle. Richard. He came to see me 6 years ago, right after I found out I was pregnant. You were away on that business trip to Singapore, remember? You were gone for 2 weeks, and I was going to tell you when you got back. I was so excited, Julian. So happy. Her voice cracked, and she had to stop to compose herself. He showed up at my apartment. I don't know how he found out about the pregnancy, maybe he'd been having me followed, I don't know. But he knew. And he told me that if I didn't disappear, if I didn't leave you and never contact you again, he would destroy everything. He had evidence, fabricated evidence, that made it look like I was stealing from Hart Industries. He had documents that would make it look like I'd seduced you just to get access to company secrets. He said he'd ruin me, press charges, make sure I went to prison. And if I was in prison. She looked toward the living room, where the children were playing. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't risk it. So I left. I changed my name, moved to a different city, tried to disappear completely. And I've been running ever since, terrified that if he ever found me, he'd make good on his threats. Julian felt like he couldn't breathe. His uncle, Richard Hart, his father's brother, the man who'd been CFO of Hart Industries for 30 years. The man who'd taught Julian about business, who'd mentored him, who'd been family. Why? Julian's voice was hollow. Why would he do that? Because I wasn't good enough for you. Lena's laugh was bitter. I was a waitress from the wrong side of town. No family, no connections, no value to the company. He said the Hart name meant something, and I would drag it through the mud. He said you'd built something important, and I would ruin it. And if I really loved you, I'd let you go. Julian's hands clenched into fists. Rage, white-hot and all-consuming, flooded through him. He had no right? He had power. That's all the right he needed. Lena wiped at her eyes. I've spent 6 years looking over my shoulder. 6 years trying to keep the kids safe and hidden. And I was doing okay, I really was, until I lost my job and then the apartment and then everything just fell apart. Last night, I was so desperate I wasn't thinking straight. I just needed help, and I typed the wrong number, and you found me. Julian's voice was soft now, the anger shifting into something else. Something that felt like purpose. You found me, and I'm not letting you go again. Not this time. Julian, you don't understand. Your uncle will pay for what he did. The words came out cold, certain. Lena, I'm not the same person I was 6 years ago. I'm not just some rising executive anymore. I'm the CEO. I have resources, power, connections. And if Richard thinks he can threaten my family and get away with it. He stopped, the word hanging in the air between them. Family. That's what they were, whether Lena wanted to admit it or not. Her and the children. His children. His family. I need to make some calls, Julian said, his mind already racing. And you need to rest. Stay here. Please. Let me handle this. Lena looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. She nodded slowly, and Julian saw the relief in her eyes. The relief of finally not carrying this burden alone. As she went to check on the children, Julian pulled out his phone and started making calls. First, to his head of security. Then to his lawyer. Then to his private investigator. If his uncle had threatened Lena, if he'd fabricated evidence and forced her to disappear, then there would be a trail. Documents. Communications. Proof. And Julian was going to find every single piece of it. The days that followed were a strange blend of domesticity and war. The doctor came and confirmed that Ethan had bronchitis, nothing serious but requiring rest and medication. So Lena and the children stayed, the temporary arrangement stretching from 1 day into 2, then 3, then a week. The penthouse transformed. Toys appeared, Julian had them delivered, ignoring Lena's protests about the expense. The sterile, museum-like space filled with laughter and the sound of small feet running. Maya claimed a corner of the living room for her drawings. Ethan built elaborate structures out of blocks on the marble coffee table that had never been used for anything before. And Lena slowly started to look less like a hunted animal and more like a person again. But beneath the surface, Julian was building his case. His private investigator was thorough and discreet. Within a week, they'd found the first piece of evidence, an email from Richard to a forger, discussing the fabricated documents he'd used to threaten Lena. Within 2 weeks, they'd found more. Much more. Richard Hart, it turned out, had been embezzling from Hart Industries for years. The false evidence he'd created against Lena had been a test run for covering his own tracks. He'd been siphoning money through shell corporations, falsifying reports, manipulating audits. Millions of dollars, gone. And when the board of directors started getting suspicious 6 months ago, Richard had worked to deflect blame onto other executives, ruining careers to save his own skin. Julian sat in his home office one evening, documents spread across his desk, and felt sick. This man, his uncle, his mentor, someone he'd trusted, was a monster. And Lena had known it. She'd seen the truth about Richard long before Julian had, and it had cost her everything. "You look like you want to kill someone." Julian looked up to find Lena in the doorway. The children were asleep. They'd established a bedtime routine over the past 2 weeks, and it was one of Julian's favorite parts of the day, reading them stories and tucking them in. Lena had been giving him space to bond with them, even though he could see how hard it was for her to share. "I might," Julian admitted. "If I thought I could get away with it." Lena came into the office, looking at the papers on his desk. "You found something." "I found everything." Julian gestured to the documents. "Embezzlement. Fraud. Blackmail, not just you, but other people too. He's been doing this for years, Lena. And I was too blind to see it." "You trusted him." "That's not blindness. That's what family is supposed to do. He used that trust to hurt you. To keep me from my children." Julian's voice hardened. "I'm taking this to the board tomorrow. And then I'm going to the police. He's done." Lena was quiet for a moment, then she said softly, "He won't go down without a fight. You know that, right? He'll try to discredit me, make it look like I'm lying, like this is revenge or—" "Let him try." Julian stood up, moving around the desk to stand in front of her. "Lena, he doesn't know that I know. He thinks you've been gone for 6 years and I've moved on. He has no idea you're back, no idea I'm onto him. We have the advantage. Julian. I'm not afraid of him anymore. And you shouldn't be either." He reached out, hesitating, then gently took her hand. She didn't pull away. "You've been running for 6 years. Let me fight for you now. Let me fight for us." Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks, and Julian pulled her into his arms. She was shaking, and he realized it was the first time she'd really let herself break down since that first night on the bench. "I'm so tired," she whispered against his chest. "I'm so tired of being scared." "Then stop. You don't have to be scared anymore. I've got you." And for the first time in 6 years, Lena let herself believe it. The board meeting happened on a Tuesday morning. Julian walked into the Hart Industries boardroom with a briefcase full of evidence and a heart full of cold, focused rage. His uncle was already there, sitting in his usual seat, looking confident and comfortable and completely unaware that his world was about to end. "Good morning, everyone," Julian said, taking his place at the head of the table. "Thank you for making time for this emergency meeting. I know it was short notice, but I've discovered something that requires immediate action." Richard smiled, that same avuncular, trustworthy smile that had fooled Julian for years. "Sounds serious, Julian. What's this about?" "It's about theft, fraud, and betrayal." Julian opened his briefcase and started distributing folders to each board member. "Richard, for the past 15 years, you've been systematically embezzling from this company. You've hidden your tracks well, but not well enough. Everything you need to see is in those folders: bank records, emails, falsified audits, communications with shell corporations. It's all there." The room went silent. Richard's smile faltered. "Julian, what the hell are you?" "I'm also here to tell you about a woman named Lena Morris." Julian's voice was steady, even though his heart was pounding. 6 years ago, my uncle threatened her. He fabricated evidence to make it look like she was stealing from this company, then used that fabrication to blackmail her into disappearing from my life. Why? Because she was pregnant with my children, and Richard decided she wasn't suitable for the Hart family. Gasps around the table. Richard's face had gone white. "That's insane," Richard sputtered. "Julian, you can't possibly believe. I have proof of everything." Julian looked around the room, meeting each board member's eyes. "My uncle is a criminal. And I'm here today to ask for a vote to remove him from this company immediately and to turn over all evidence to law enforcement." The next hour was chaos. Richard denied everything, then tried to spin it, then finally started threatening, making wild accusations about Julian, about Lena, about anyone he could think of. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the board members weren't fools. By the end of the meeting, Richard Hart had been removed from his position, stripped of his access to company systems, and escorted from the building by security. The company's lawyers were already contacting the authorities. It was over. Julian stood at the boardroom window after everyone had left, watching his uncle's car pull away from the building, and felt something release in his chest. Relief. Justice. Closure. His phone buzzed. A text from Lena. "I'm watching the news. They're reporting on it. Julian, are you okay?" He smiled and typed back. "I'm perfect. Come home." Home. The penthouse had become home somehow over the past few weeks. Not just for him, but for all of them. And Julian was done pretending this was temporary. The press conference happened a week later. Julian stood at a podium outside Hart Industries headquarters, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Next to him, Lena stood with her shoulders back and her head high. They debated whether she should be there, whether it was safe, whether it would invite too much scrutiny, but in the end, Lena had insisted. "I'm done hiding," she'd said. "Whatever happens, we face it together." So they did. Julian told the story, carefully, legally, leaving out details that were still part of the investigation but making it clear that his uncle had committed serious crimes and that those crimes had affected not just the company, but Julian's personal life as well. And then Lena spoke. "6 years ago, I was forced to disappear," she said, her voice steady even though Julian could see her hands shaking slightly. "I was threatened by someone powerful, someone who decided I wasn't good enough for the man I loved. I was told that if I didn't leave, I would be destroyed. And I believed him, because I had seen what power could do. So I left. I disappeared. And I raised my children alone, always looking over my shoulder, always afraid." She paused, taking a breath. "But I'm not afraid anymore. Because the truth is more powerful than fear. And today, I want every person out there who's being threatened, who's being silenced, who's being told they're not good enough, I want you to know that you are. You are good enough. You are worthy. And you don't have to run." The cameras went wild. The questions came fast and furious. But Julian and Lena had said what they needed to say, and they left the podium together, hand in hand. The story dominated the news cycle for weeks. Public opinion shifted quickly. Richard Hart went from respected executive to cautionary tale. The investigation uncovered even more crimes. By the end of the month, Richard was facing criminal charges that would likely put him in prison for the rest of his life. And for the first time in 6 years, Lena could breathe without fear. 3 months later, the penthouse looked completely different. The sleek, sterile museum had become a real home. Toys in corners. Children's artwork on the refrigerator. A bookshelf full of picture books. Photographs on the mantle. Julia had hired a photographer to take family portraits, wanting to capture every moment, to make up for all the moments he'd missed. Lena had enrolled the twins in school. She'd started seeing a therapist to work through the trauma of the past 6 years. She'd even started painting again, something she'd loved before Richard's threats had made her give up anything that might make her visible. And Julian had changed too. He'd stepped back from some of his responsibilities at work, delegating more, making space for what really mattered. He coached Ethan's soccer team. He attended Maya's school plays. He learned how to braid hair and make pancakes and read the same bedtime story 17 times in a row without complaining. He learned how to be a father. And slowly, carefully, he and Lena learned how to be together again. It wasn't easy. 6 years of pain and separation couldn't be erased overnight. They went to couples therapy. They had hard conversations. They fought and cried and slowly learned to trust each other again. But they were building something real. Something that wasn't based on fear or secrets or what might have been. They were building a future. Julian also started the Lena Morris Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping vulnerable families find housing and support. It was funded by the money recovered from Richard's embezzlement, money that Julian insisted should go toward making sure no one else had to spend a winter night on a frozen bench with nowhere to turn. The first shelter opened in the spring, right on Marlowe Avenue. Where it all began. On a cold Saturday in December, almost exactly a year after that first night, Julian, Lena, and the twins stood on Marlowe Avenue, looking at the bench where everything had changed. The shelter was lit up behind them, warm and welcoming. Families were inside, safe, fed, supported. The bench itself had been turned into a small memorial of sorts, with a plaque that read, "For everyone who has nowhere to go, there is always hope." "I can't believe it's been a year," Lena said softly, watching the snow begin to fall. "It was lighter this year, gentler somehow." "Best wrong number I ever received," Julian said, and Lena laughed, leaning into him. "Daddy, can we go inside?" "It's cold," Maya said, tugging on Julian's coat. "Sure, sweetheart." But Julian paused, looking at Lena. "Wait. There's something I want to do first." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Lena's eyes went wide. "Julian. I know we're taking things slow," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple, beautiful ring. "I know we're still figuring things out. But Lena, I knew 6 years ago that I wanted to spend my life with you. And everything that's happened since then, all the pain and separation and fear, it hasn't changed that. If anything, it's made me more sure. So I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or next month or even next year. I'm just asking you to say yes. To say that eventually, when you're ready, you'll marry me. That will make this official. That will be a real family." Tears streamed down Lena's face, but she was smiling. "We're already a real family, Julian. We have been since that first night. So is that a yes?" "That's a yes." She laughed through her tears. "Yes, eventually. Yes, when I'm ready. Yes to all of it. Julian slipped the ring on her finger, and Maya and Ethan cheered, jumping up and down in the snow. People passing by stopped and applauded. It was perfect and imperfect and real and messy and exactly what they needed. They went inside the shelter after that, the four of them together, and spent the evening helping serve dinner to families who were just beginning their own journeys toward hope. And as Julian watched Lena laugh with the kids, watched her light up the room the way she always had, he thought about that mistyped message 1 year ago. That tiny mistake that had changed everything. Sometimes the wrong path leads to the right destination. Sometimes a mistake is really a miracle in disguise. Sometimes what looks like an ending is actually just the beginning. They'd lost 6 years. But they had the rest of their lives to make up for it. And Julian intended to make every single day count. Outside, the snow fell soft and steady, covering Marlowe Avenue in white. But inside there was warmth and light and laughter and love. Inside, there was home. And that wrong number on the coldest night of the year? It had led them exactly where they were always meant to be. Together. What started as a desperate plea sent to the wrong person became the catalyst for truth, healing, and second chances. Julian and Lena's story reminds us that sometimes our biggest mistakes lead to our greatest blessings, and that love, real love, is worth fighting for no matter how long the road back may be. From a frozen bench to a family rebuilt, this is proof that even in our darkest moments, hope is just one message away.